The alarm on her phone wasn't just a sound. It was the starting pistol for a race that never seemed to end. At 4:30 a.m., the world outside her small apartment was still a deep, quiet blue, but inside the day had already begun. She moved through the darkness of her small apartment with a practiced, silent shuffle so as not to wake the sleeping figure in the next room, her son. He was the reason for everything, for the heavy feeling in her eyelids and the dull ache that had taken up permanent residence in her lower back. After a quick shower and a piece of toast eaten standing up, she was out the door, the cool morning air a welcome shock to her system. The city was just beginning to stir, with a few lonely cars and streetlights casting long, empty shadows. Her walk to the coffee shop was a familiar meditation, a 15-minute journey from the quiet of her neighborhood to the heart of the downtown hustle, the coffee shop. The Daily Perk was her domain, her battlefield, and her sanctuary all rolled into one. She was the first one there, the one who knew the secret combination of buttons and taps to coax the temperamental espresso machine back to life. The rich, nutty aroma of grinding beans was the real smell of morning for her. She'd wipe down the counters, arrange the pastries in their glass case with a care that bordered on artistic, and mentally prepare for the onslaught. By 6 a.m., the first wave of customers would arrive, a line of tired faces, all needing a little bit of liquid energy to start their own races. And she was there to give it to them. She wasn't just a barista. She was a therapist, a friend, a moment of calm in their chaotic morning. She knew the man who always ordered a black coffee, no room for cream, because he was saving his calories for a donut. She knew the young woman studying for exams who needed extra, whipped cream on her mocha for a boost of sugar-fueled confidence. She knew their stories, not because they told her, but because she paid attention. This human connection was the very thing her manager, Mr. Albright, seemed determined to stamp out. He was a man who believed in systems, not people. He arrived at 7 a.m. sharp, his polished shoes clicking on the tiled floor with a sound that always made the staff's shoulders tense just a little bit more. He ran the shop not like a community hub, but like a fortress defending its profits. The walls were covered in laminated posters with corporate slogans about efficiency and excellence, but the one everyone knew by heart was the small, stark print behind the register. Theft of any kind, including unauthorized giveaways, is grounds for immediate termination. Mr. Albright treated this rule like holy scripture. He would stand by the counter, his arms crossed, watching the scales on the pastry case with an eagle eye, as if a single missing croissant could bankrupt the entire company. He saw the employees not as people, but as potential liabilities. And he saw the customers not as regulars, but as transactions, one slow Tuesday afternoon. She was wiping down a table when her eyes fell on the photo tucked into the edge of her mirror behind the counter. It was her son, gap-toothed and grinning, holding up a drawing of a dinosaur. A wave of love and exhaustion washed over her. This job was everything. It was the health insurance, the rent, the money for his school trip next month. It was the reason she had to go straight from here to her evening job at the diner, a shift that would end long after he was asleep. The weight of it all felt immense sometimes, a heavy coat she could never take off. But then the little bell above the door would jingle, and she'd put on her smile, the one that reached her eyes, because for the next few hours this was her world, and she was determined to make it a warm one. Despite the coldness of management, her natural warmth often put her at odds with the rules. There was an elderly gentleman who came in every day at 2 p.m. for a tea and a biscotti. He was a widower, and the coffee shop was his main source of social interaction. He would talk about his late wife, about the books he was reading, about the good old days. One afternoon, he was fumbling with his change and came up $1 short. He looked so embarrassed, his face flushing red. Without a second thought, she had waved her hand. "Don't worry about it, Arthur. It's on the house today?" The look of relief and gratitude on his face was worth $100. But from across the room she felt Mr. Albright's gaze on her, cold and heavy. He didn't say anything then, but later, as she was getting ready to leave, he called her into his office. He didn't shout. His voice was quiet and clinical, which somehow made it worse. He simply pointed to the rule on the wall. "We are not a charity," he said, his eyes fixed on a spreadsheet on his desk. "Let's not have a repeat of that. Understand?" She just nodded, the shame burning in her cheeks. She understood perfectly. Her kindness was a liability. Her compassion was a risk. And in Mr. Albright's world, risks had to be eliminated. The afternoon had settled into that quiet, lazy rhythm that only happens on a rainy Tuesday. The morning rush was a distant memory, a frantic blur of steam and spilled milk. Now, the coffee shop was a sanctuary. The hiss of the espresso machine was a soft, comforting sound, punctuated by the gentle patter of rain against the large front window. A few customers were scattered about, lost in their laptops or the pages of a book, the warm light from the lamps creating little islands of coziness in the gray afternoon. She was methodically wiping down the counter, her movements slow and practiced, enjoying this rare moment of calm. It was in these quiet pockets that she could almost forget the weight on her shoulders, the constant tally of bills in her head. The tiredness that lived deep in her bones. The little bell above the door chimed, a soft, welcome sound. She looked up, a ready smile on her face, but it faltered for just a second. A man stood just inside the doorway, shaking the rain from a worn baseball cap. He was dressed simply in a dark jacket and jeans, and he seemed to be trying to make himself small, to blend into the background. But there was something about him, a quiet familiarity that tugged at the back of her mind. He moved toward the counter, his steps light and unhurried. As he got closer, she saw his face. It wasn't the face you saw on magazine covers, all bright teeth and perfect poses. It was softer, more thoughtful. And the eyes. She knew those eyes. They were kind and a little bit sad, and they had been a part of her living room for years. Beaming out from the television screen on nights when she felt completely alone, It was him. The actor from that movie about the bus, the one with the computers, the one where he was a good guy in a world of bad guys. She felt a little flutter in her chest, a star-struck jolt she immediately pushed down. He was just a person coming in out of the rain, and he looked exhausted. His shoulders were slumped, not with the weight of fame, but with a simple, human weariness. He gave her a small, polite smile as he reached the counter. "What can I get for you?" she asked, her voice steady and warm. Just like it was for every other customer, he looked up at the menu board, his eyes scanning it slowly. "Just a black coffee, please," he said. His voice was quiet, a little raspy. "And one of those croissants, if you don't mind." He pointed a finger toward the glass case where the pastries sat. Coming right up, she turned to her work, her hands moving with automatic grace. She scooped the fresh coffee grounds into the portafilter, tamped them down, and locked it into the machine. The rich, dark espresso began to drip into the cup, filling the air with its intoxicating aroma. She placed a flaky croissant on a small plate and warmed it for just a few seconds in the oven. As she worked, she could feel his presence behind her, quiet and patient. He wasn't on his phone or looking around impatiently. He was just standing there, watching the rain streak down the window. A man taking a small moment of peace in a long day. She placed the coffee and the warm pastry on a tray and turned to the register. "That'll be $6.50, she said with a smile. He reached into his back pocket for his wallet, but his hand came out empty. He patted his other pocket, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. "Oh, hang on," he murmured, a little embarrassed. He started to unzip his jacket, his movements becoming a bit more frantic. "Sorry, I think it's in my other jacket." He looked genuinely flustered, like a regular person who had just made a simple, everyday mistake. He wasn't annoyed or demanding. He was just a guy having a slightly awkward moment, and in that moment, looking at his tired face and his sincere apology, something shifted inside her. She thought about all the times his movies had been an escape for her. She remembered one particularly bad week, when her son had been sick and she'd barely slept, feeling like she was failing at everything. She had put on one of his action movies, one where he was always trying to do the right thing against impossible odds. And for 2 hours, she hadn't been a tired, worried single mom. She'd just been a person watching a hero. This man, without ever knowing it, had given her a little bit of strength when she needed it most. Her eyes flicked over to the office. Through the glass partition, she could see the silhouette of her manager, Mr. Albright, hunched over his desk. She could almost feel his eyes on her, a constant cold pressure. The image of the laminated rule on the wall flashed in her mind. Unauthorized giveaways, grounds for immediate termination. She thought about her son, about the rent, about the second job she had to get to in a few hours. The risk was enormous. It was stupid. It was reckless, but then she looked back at the man in front of her, still fumbling with his jacket, his face flushed with embarrassment. He just looked like he needed a break. A small one. A simple cup of coffee and a warm pastry. She made up her mind in a heartbeat. With a quick, almost invisible tap of her finger on the touchscreen, she canceled the transaction. The screen went blank. She picked up the tray and slid it across the counter to him. "It's on me," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Thank you for everything you do." He stopped his search and looked up at her, genuinely surprised. The weariness in his eyes seemed to lift, replaced by a look of deep, sincere warmth. A small, beautiful smile spread across his face, reaching all the way to his eyes. "Oh, wow," he said, his voice full of gratitude. "Thank you. Thank you." He didn't make a big deal out of it. He just accepted the kindness with a quiet grace that felt more real than any movie scene. He picked up his coffee and the plate, gave her one last appreciative nod, and went to sit at a small table in the corner away from the window. He took a sip of his coffee and a bite of his croissant, and for a moment he just sat there looking out at the rain, a picture of simple contentment. She watched him for a second, her heart feeling light. It was the right thing to do. It felt good. It felt human. Then, her gaze drifted back toward the office. Mr. Albright was standing now, his face no longer a silhouette but a hard, stone-like mask visible through the glass. He wasn't looking at his spreadsheets anymore. He was looking directly at her. He had seen everything. The warmth in her chest vanished, replaced by a sudden, icy dread that snaked its way up her spine. The quiet patter of rain on the window suddenly sounded like a countdown. The silence that followed was louder than any shout. From his office, the manager didn't wave her over with an angry gesture. He simply raised a single, rigid finger and pointed to the floor in front of his desk. It was a command, quiet and absolute. The few customers in the shop were lost in their own worlds, but to her, it felt like a spotlight had just been turned on, illuminating her small act of rebellion. Her feet felt like lead as she untied her apron, the familiar motion now feeling foreign and final. She hung it on a hook by the espresso machine, her fingers brushing against the worn fabric. It was more than an apron. It was her armor. Without it, she felt naked and exposed. Each step toward the office was a mile long. The hiss of the milk steamer, the clink of a spoon against a ceramic mug, the soft murmur of conversation, all the sounds of her world began to fade, replaced by the frantic thumping of her own heart. She could feel the eyes of her coworkers on her back, a mixture of pity and fear. They all knew the rules. They all knew what this meant. She walked past the little table in the corner where the actor sat. He had taken off his cap and was looking out the window, a half-eaten croissant on his plate. He seemed so peaceful, so unaware of the storm he had accidentally stirred. For a fleeting second she felt a flash of anger, but it was quickly replaced by a wave of protectiveness. No, this wasn't his fault. This was about something much bigger and colder. She pushed open the door to the office. The change in atmosphere was immediate. The warm, coffee-scented air of the shop was gone, replaced by the sterile, faint smell of electronics and cleaning fluid. The room was as impersonal as a hotel room. There was a metal desk, a chair, and a filing cabinet. The walls were bare, save for a framed certificate of corporate achievement and a large, laminated copy of the employee handbook, open to a page highlighted in yellow. She didn't need to look closer to know it was the page about theft. The manager, Mr. Albright, didn't invite her to sit. He remained standing, his back ramrod straight, his hands clasped behind him. He was a man who seemed to be carved from wood, his face permanently set in an expression of mild disappointment. He waited until the door clicked shut behind her, sealing them in the quiet, cold space. "Do you know why you are in here?" he asked. His voice wasn't angry. It was flat, devoid of any emotion, which somehow made it 100 times worse. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a small squeak came out. She cleared her throat and tried again. "The coffee," she managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. "The gentleman?" He forgot his wallet. Mr. Albright held up a hand, stopping her. "The circumstances are irrelevant," he said, his eyes fixed on a point just above her head. He never made direct eye contact, as if she were an object to be managed, not a person to be addressed. "The policy is explicit. An authorized distribution of company assets is grounds for immediate termination. There are no exceptions." "But it was just a coffee and a croissant," she pleaded, the desperation starting to creep into her voice. "It wasn't even $7. He's a good person. I was just trying to be kind." "Kindness is not a line item on a balance sheet," he said, finally turning his gaze to her. His eyes were a pale, washed-out blue, and they held no warmth at all. "We are a business, not a charity. Your job is to follow procedures, not to dispense kindness based on your personal assessment of a customer's character. Today it was a $7 item. Tomorrow it could be more. Where does it end? We have rules for a reason. They create order. They ensure fairness. They protect the business." The word fairness hung in the air, ugly and distorted. There was nothing fair about this. Her mind raced, a frantic scramble of panicked thoughts. The rent was due in 2 weeks. Her son needed new shoes. The prescription for her mother's medication. The bills seemed to pile up in her mind, a mountain of paper that she had no way of climbing without this job. The second job at the diner barely covered the groceries. This job was the foundation, and it was crumbling beneath her feet. "Please," she whispered, a tear escaping and tracing a hot path down her cheek. "I need this job. I have a son. I won't ever do it again. I promise." Mr. Albright's expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a single sheet of paper and a pen. He slid them across the desk. The paper was stark white, covered in small, black text. At the top, in bold letters, were the words "Termination of employment." "My decision is final," he said, his voice still impossibly calm. "This is not a negotiation. It is a procedure. We have a zero-tolerance policy. To make an exception for you would be to undermine the very system that keeps this establishment running efficiently. It would set a bad precedent for the other employees." He was talking about precedents and systems, but all she could think about was the look on her son's face when she told him. She thought about the drawing of the dinosaur he had made her, tucked into her wallet. She thought about the late nights and the early mornings, all of it for nothing. All of it erased by a single split-second decision to be a decent human being. She looked down at the paper. The words swam before her eyes. She saw the line where she was supposed to sign. It felt like signing away her life, her stability, her future. A wave of something hot and fierce rose up in her chest. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It was anger. A deep, burning anger at this man in his sterile office, with his rules and his procedures and his complete lack of humanity. He saw an infraction. She saw a person who was tired and needed a moment of grace. Slowly, she picked up the pen. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely hold it. She thought of the actor's face, the genuine surprise and gratitude in his eyes. She thought of the warmth that had spread through her chest, the feeling that, for one moment, she had done something truly good. Was it worth it? The question echoed in the silence of the room. The manager watched her, his face a mask of impatient expectation. She thought of her son, and the tears came freely now, silent and steady. She signed her name on the line. The scratch of the pen on the paper was the loudest sound in the world. It was done. "Your personal belongings are in your locker," Mr. Albright said, taking the paper back as if it were contaminated. "Please collect them and exit the premises. Your final paycheck will be mailed to you." She didn't say another word. There was nothing left to say. She turned and walked out of the office, the door clicking shut behind her, the sound sealing her fate. The walk back through the coffee shop was a blur of shame. She kept her head down, not wanting to see the faces of her coworkers or the customers. She just wanted to be invisible. She went to her locker, the little metal door feeling heavy as she opened it. Inside were her purse, a worn-out novel she read on her breaks, and a picture of her son taped to the inside of the door. She carefully took down the picture, her fingers trembling, and placed it in her purse. She didn't have a box, so she just carried her things in her arms. As she walked toward the front door, she risked one last glance at the corner table. It was empty. The actor was gone. The only thing left was the empty coffee cup and the plate with a few crumbs left on it. He had finished his coffee and his pastry, enjoyed his moment of peace, and left, completely unaware that his brief visit had just dismantled her entire life. She pushed the door open and stepped out into the rain. The bell chimed one last time, a cheerful final insult. The cold rain immediately soaked her hair and her shoulders, but she barely felt it. The world outside was gray and miserable, a perfect reflection of how she felt inside. She was just a woman standing on a sidewalk in the rain, holding a few meager possessions in her arms, with no job, no plan, and a mountain of worries waiting for her at home. The kindness had cost her everything. And as she stood there, alone and invisible in the streaming rain, she wasn't sure it had been worth it at all. The rain had followed her home, not as a physical downpour, but as a cold, damp feeling that seeped deep into her bones. She sat on the edge of her sofa, the worn fabric groaning under her weight, staring at the wall. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. In a few hours, her son would come bouncing through the door, full of energy and stories about his day, and she would have to find the strength to tell him that their world had just gotten a lot smaller. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on her shoulders, making it hard to breathe. She replayed the scene in the manager's office over and over, his cold, emotionless voice, the stark white termination paper, the finality of the pen scratching across the page. She had risked everything for a moment of human connection, and in return she had been treated like a common criminal. The kindness felt foolish now, a naive and costly mistake, but while she was lost in her own private world of despair, the story of her kindness was breaking free, spreading like wildfire through the digital world. It had started with a young woman sitting in the corner of the coffee shop that afternoon. She had been working on her laptop, trying to finish a paper, but the scene at the counter had pulled her in. She saw the whole thing, the kind-faced actor, the small act of generosity, and then the cold, hard punishment that followed. She felt a surge of anger, a deep sense of injustice that wouldn't let her focus. So she did what people of her generation do. She took to her keyboard. She didn't write a long dramatic essay. She just wrote what she saw, her fingers flying across the keys with a furious energy. "You are not going to believe what I just witnessed at the Daily Perk downtown," she typed. "The kindest barista, a woman who always remembers my order, just got fired? Why? Because Keanu Reeves came in, forgot his wallet, and she gave him a coffee and a croissant on the house. The manager saw it and in front of everyone fired her on the spot. For being kind to Keanu Reeves. The world is broken." She attached a picture of the outside of the coffee shop and hit post on a popular local community forum. At first, it was just a few likes and comments. "Wow, that's awful. I love that place, but the manager is a jerk. Which Keanu?" But then, someone recognized the description of the actor and confirmed they had seen him in the area that day. That was the spark? The post was shared and then shared again. It jumped from the local forum to a citywide social media page. From there, it was picked up by a popular entertainment blog. The headline was simple and powerful: "Hero barista fired for act of kindness to Keanu Reeves." The story resonated in a way no one could have predicted. It wasn't just about a celebrity. It was about something everyone understood: the frustration of soulless corporate rules, the feeling of being powerless under a rigid manager, the universal desire to just be a good person to another human being. People were not just reading the story. They were feeling it. The comments section became a river of outrage and support. "This is everything that's wrong with the world. One person wrote. "We need more people like her, not fewer," said another. People started sharing their own stories of being fired for ridiculous reasons, or of small acts of kindness that had made their day. A virtual movement was forming, all centered on a woman they didn't know and an act of kindness they hadn't seen. The hashtag justice for the barista started trending. The story was no longer just a local incident. It was a global conversation about empathy in a corporate world. All the while, she remained completely unaware. Her phone was on the kitchen counter, silenced and forgotten. She was too busy trying to figure out how to stretch her last paycheck to cover rent and groceries. She was drafting a mental list of all the other coffee shops and diners in town, places she could apply to, places where she wouldn't be known as the woman who got fired for being too kind. The shame was a cloud that blocked out everything else. When her son came home, she put on a brave face, helped him with his homework, and read him a story, her heart aching with every word. She was an island of misery in a sea of digital support that she couldn't see thousands of miles away. In a quiet, sunlit office, a man was scrolling through a daily report. It was part of his job to monitor the online presence of his most famous client. He was used to seeing gossip, rumors, and fan theories. But this headline made him stop. Hero barista fired for act of kindness to Keanu Reeves. He clicked on the link and read the story. As he read, his professional demeanor softened. He saw the viral posts, the outpouring of support, the hashtag. This wasn't a scandal. This was a story about a good person. He knew he had to show it to the actor himself. He found him in a small rehearsal room, practicing lines for his next film. He was alone, focused, his brow furrowed in concentration. The assistant waited for a break in the scene before approaching him quietly. "Sorry to bother you," he said softly, "but there's something online I think you should see. It's starting to get a lot of attention." The actor took the offered tablet, his expression curious. He read the initial post, then the blog article, then some of the thousands of comments. As he read, his face changed. The focused concentration melted away, replaced by a look of deep concern and sadness. He read about her being a single mother, about the manager's coldness, about her losing her job over a simple cup of coffee. He remembered the interaction clearly. He remembered her warm smile, the genuine kindness in her eyes when she said, "It's on me." It had meant a lot to him in that moment, a small ray of light in a weary day. The thought that his presence, his simple need for a coffee, had led to this, was heartbreaking. He looked up from the tablet, his eyes filled with a troubled emotion. "This is because of me?" he asked, his voice quiet. "No," his assistant said quickly. "This is because of a manager with no heart and a terrible policy. You were just, there. But she wouldn't have been in that position if I hadn't forgotten my wallet." He insisted, a sense of responsibility washing over him. He couldn't shake the image of her losing her livelihood, all because she had been decent to him. He thought about her son, about the stress she must be feeling. The story wasn't just a headline to him. It was about a real person, a person whose life he had inadvertently negatively impacted. He handed the tablet back, his jaw set with a new determination. The sadness in his eyes was being replaced by something else, a quiet resolve. "That's not right," he said, his voice firm but calm. "We can't let this stand. An act of kindness shouldn't be a liability. It should be celebrated." He began to pace the small room, his mind already working, turning the problem over, looking for a solution. He wasn't just going to post a statement of support. That felt empty. He needed to do something real, something tangible. He needed to fix this. Not just for her, but to send a message to the world. A message that kindness still matters. The world outside her small apartment had moved on, but inside, time felt like it had stopped. 2 days had passed since she'd walked out of the coffee shop, 2 days of drowning in a sea of what-ifs. A friend had called, her voice frantic, telling her to look online. And so she had, her hands shaking as she scrolled through hundreds, then thousands of posts. Her story, her small, foolish, kind moment splashed across screens for everyone to see. Strangers were defending her, arguing for her, feeling angry on her behalf. It was overwhelming, a tidal wave of support from people she would never meet. But it didn't pay the rent. It didn't soothe the fear in her son's eyes when he asked why she was home so much. The online love was a warm blanket, but the cold reality of unemployment was a draft she couldn't block out. She was sitting at her kitchen table, a half-finished resume on her laptop screen, when her phone buzzed. It was a number she didn't recognize. She almost ignored it, but something made her answer. A calm, professional voice on the other end asked if she would be willing to come down to the Daily Perk in an hour. They wouldn't say why, only that it was important. With a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach, she agreed. Meanwhile, a strange energy was building outside the coffee shop. What started as a few curious onlookers had grown into a small crowd. A local news van was parked at the curb, its satellite dish pointed at the sky like a metal flower. People held up homemade signs. "Kindness is not a crime," one read. "We stand with our barista," said another. The atmosphere was less like a protest and more like a vigil, a quiet, determined gathering of people who felt a line had been crossed. Inside, the manager, Mr. Albright, paced behind the counter, his polished shoes clicking anxiously on the floor. He had spent the last 2 days on the phone with corporate, defending his decision. He had followed the rules. He had done his job. But looking out at the sea of faces, all of them turned toward his shop, he felt a flicker of doubt for the first time. He had enforced a policy, but he had ignited a movement right on schedule. A simple, black car pulled up to the curb. The crowd murmured, a ripple of excitement passing through it. The door opened and he stepped out. He wasn't dressed like a movie star. He wore the same kind of simple jacket and jeans he had worn the other day. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear and focused. He didn't wave or pose for the cameras. He simply nodded at the people in the crowd, a gesture of quiet acknowledgement, and walked toward the shop door. The bell chimed as he entered, and the small number of customers inside fell silent. Mr. Albright stopped his pacing, his back straightening as he prepared for a confrontation, but the actor didn't raise his voice. He walked directly to the manager, his expression calm and serious. The news cameras, which had been filming the crowd, now swiveled to capture the scene inside the shop. "I need to talk to you," the actor said, his voice low but firm. "This is a private establishment," Mr. Albright stammered, his usual confidence gone. "You can't just come in here with cameras." "I'm not here as a customer," the actor replied, his gaze unwavering. "I'm here as a human being. The woman you fired, the one who showed me a little bit of kindness when I was having a tired day, she didn't steal from you. She gave something, and you punished her for it." "It's policy," the manager insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "A policy that says a $6 coffee is more important than a person's dignity? A person's job?" He shook his head slowly. "A business isn't just about the product you sell. It's about the people who work there and the people who walk through your door. She was the best part of this place. She was the heart. And you cut it out to save a few dollars?" He then turned away from the manager and faced the cameras, his presence filling the small shop. The crowd outside pressed closer to the windows, their faces pressed against the glass. "I came here today because I was so moved by this woman's selflessness, and so disturbed by the consequences she faced for it," he began, his voice clear and steady. "An act of kindness should never be a liability. It should be celebrated. It should be the foundation of everything we do." He took a deep breath. "So, to honor her and to help others in her situation, I am making a $100,000 donation in her name to a local charity that supports single parents, so they can have a little less to worry about." A gasp went through the crowd. Mr. Albright looked like he might faint, but the actor wasn't finished. "But that's not enough," he continued. "Giving her money doesn't give her back her dignity. It doesn't give her back the joy she took in her work. So I'm also going to do something else. I am personally funding her to start her own coffee shop, a place where she can set the rules, a place built on the very principle that got her fired here, kindness." He paused, letting the words sink in. The world seemed to hold its breath. "It will be a community-focused shop," he said, a small smile finally touching his lips. And it will have a pay-it-forward wall where customers can buy a coffee for someone who can't afford one. A place where no one is ever turned away for being short $1. A place where the heart of the business is, well, the heart. Just then, the shop door opened again. It was her. She had been escorted here by the actors' team, told only that she needed to be here. She stopped in the doorway, her eyes wide with confusion as she took in the scene, the cameras, the crowd, the famous actor standing in the middle of her old workplace. Talking about her, the actor turned and saw her. He walked over to her, his expression gentle. "We were just talking about you," he said softly. She looked from him to the cameras, to the faces pressed against the window, her mind struggling to catch up. She saw the tears in the eyes of the news reporter. She saw the looks of pure joy on the faces of the strangers in the crowd. The reality of what was happening washed over her, a wave of emotion so powerful it almost knocked her off her feet. The kindness that had cost her everything, had just given her a new world. The tears she had been holding back for days finally broke free, streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of overwhelming, breathtaking gratitude. The actor simply stood by her side, a quiet, supportive presence as the cameras rolled. Capturing the moment, a simple act of goodness blossomed into a legacy of compassion that would bring tears to the eyes of everyone who saw it.